Hari itu, sore di tahun 2006, ibu pergi dari rumah. Tak ada yang tahu kapan ibu pergi. Kami mencari di berbagai tempat. Hingga kini, 15 tahun kemudian, hingga tahun 2021, kami tak pernah lagi berjumpa ibu. Sejak setahun sebelum ibu pergi, ibu mengalami gangguan memori, seperti pelupa, linglung, pikun. Kemudian hari, kami tahu nama penyakit ibu, dementia Alzheimer. Kami terlambat menyadarinya. Sungguh saat itu kami tak tahu apa dan bagaimana cara memberi respons yang tepat. Kami kehilangan ibu kami.
Eka dan keluarga kehilangan ibu mereka karena terlambat menyadari. Juga karena tak mengetahui apa yang mesti dilakukan. Apabila di sekitar Anda ada yang menunjukkan perilaku seperti menanyakan berulang-ulang, sulit fokus dalam melakukan aktivitas sehari-hari, disorientasi seperti berbagai kasus lansia hilang dan tersesat, gangguan berkomunikasi, mencurigai sesuatu secara berlebihan, marah-marah, emosi berubah drastis, antisosial maupun bermuram durja. Apa yang harus dilakukan? Demensia adalah gangguan penurunan fungsi otak yang mempengaruhi daya ingat, emosi, pengambilan keputusan, dan fungsi otak lainnya. Demensia umumnya terjadi di usia 65 tahun ke atas, tetapi ada berbagai kasus di dunia yang menyasar usia muda atau biasa disebut young onset dementia, early onset dementia. Penting bagi kita di usia muda untuk senantiasa menjalankan pola hidup sehat dan mengurangi risiko demensia dengan aktif bersosialisasi, berpikiran positif, beraktivitas produktif, serta menerapkan cerdik, yaitu cek kesehatan rutin, enyahkan asap rokok, rajin berolahraga, diet gizi seimbang, istirahat cukup, dan kelola stres. Berikut adalah langkah-langkah yang dilakukan apabila ada yang menunjukkan gejala demensia Alzheimer di sekitar kita. Pertama, mendapatkan diagnosa akurat. Konsultasikan ke dokter Anda untuk mendapatkan pemeriksaan memori dan mendapatkan kepastian diagnosa dan perawatan lebih lanjut. Mengikuti arahan dokter dalam penerapan terapi farmakologi seperti minum obat sesuai resep dokter dan non-farmakologi seperti terapi psikologis dan sosial melalui berbagai aktivitas bermakna dan kegiatan stimulasi otak lainnya. Anda juga dapat menggunakan layanan online navigasi perawatan ALZI atau Narazi bersama dokter dan tim Care Navigators dengan menghubungi hotline Narazi. Layanan Narazi adalah program konsultasi nyaman dari rumah via online untuk menjawab keluhan, masalah yang dialami keluarga, didampingi Care Navigators, Caregiver ALZI yang sudah berpengalaman, dan dokter ahli demi tercapainya kualitas hidup yang baik untuk orang dengan demensia dan caregiversnya. Kedua, memberikan perawatan dan pendampingan maksimal dengan memperkuat dan melibatkan dukungan keluarga dan berbagai pihak dengan cara menjadwalkan rapat keluarga untuk membahas perencanaan perawatan dan pendampingan, didukung caregivers keluarga maupun caregivers profesional, termasuk mengatur roster jadwal semua pihak dalam berkontribusi dan berperan dalam perawatan, pendampingan, dan melakukan aktivitas bermakna. Membuat buku catatan kesehatan dan kegiatan sehari-hari atau biasa disebut logbook, mengatur jadwal nutrisi, asupan gizi seimbang, meningkatkan kesehatan fungsi kognitif otak dengan berolahraga rutin dan melaksanakan aktivitas sehari-hari. Tetap berinteraksi sosial dengan komunitas, berpartisipasi dalam webinar dan kegiatan lainnya, serta merekrut caregiver profesional apabila diperlukan. Ketiga, bergabung bersama komunitas peduli Alzheimer, support group, serta mengikuti berbagai pelatihan. Satu orang menunjukkan gejala demensia Alzheimer, seluruh anggota keluarga terdampak. Setelah mendapat diagnosa dari dokter, bukanlah akhir dari segalanya. Selanjutnya, untuk kualitas hidup yang baik, orang dengan demensia perlu mendapatkan perawatan dan pendampingan yang maksimal. ALZI didirikan untuk meningkatkan kualitas hidup orang dengan demensia dan caregiversnya melalui berbagai dukungan. Di antaranya, adanya program online maupun offline agar orang dengan demensia dan caregivers tetap aktif produktif melakukan aktivitas bermakna, mendapatkan informasi dan edukasi mengenai tips dan trik perawatan, pelatihan, akses untuk konsultasi dengan tenaga kesehatan, dan terhubung dengan komunitas caregivers support group ALZI. Komunitas ALZI terbuka untuk orang dengan demensia, keluarga pendamping caregivers, lansia, lintas generasi, serta masyarakat umum, pemerhati, isu lansia dan demensia di Indonesia. Kita semua berperan dalam membantu mengurangi faktor resiko serta isu kesendirian, depresi, kecemasan, dan kesehatan mental. ALZI juga mengundang lansia serta anak muda yang memiliki potensi dan keahlian di berbagai bidang, seperti bidang penelitian, seni, diantaranya melukis, bernyanyi, mendongeng, menulis buku, berolahraga, senam, wirausaha, literasi teknologi, dan lainnya, untuk berkontribusi sebagai relawan maupun mitra ALZI. Hubungi ALZI melalui nomor hotline, email, website, maupun follow sosial media kami. Salam sehat untuk semua. Kenali demensia Alzheimer dari sekarang. Diagnosa tepat dan deteksi dini demi kualitas hidup yang baik untuk kita semua. Jangan maklum dengan pikun. Kedua, memberikan.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the 41st ALZI Ned online series. I'm Tania, Research and Science Coordinator of Stichting Alzheimer Indonesia, Nederland. It's a pleasure to be your host and moderator in today's session, titled Intimacy and Sexuality in Dementia. I would like to give a warm welcome to our special speaker today, Professor Frans Hoogeveen, and all participants that have joined. In this session, we will learn and discuss how dementia may affect intimacy and sexuality. We know that all of us, including people with dementia, have needs for friendship, companionship, intimacy, and also expression of sexuality. Even though talking about this topic can be difficult as it is considered as a sensitive or even taboo in Indonesia, I believe only by having open conversation, it will be possible for us to be better prepared for the challenges that often come with the disease. So for today's agenda, we will start with the opening remarks and then our usual, like our routine group photo and brain exercise, followed by a short sharing session before the presentation. So if you have any questions, please write it on the chat box and then we will discuss it during the Q&A session after the presentation. So first of all, I would like to invite Amalia van Utomo, our chairperson of Stichting Alzheimer Indonesia Nederland, for the opening remarks. Amalia, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Tania, and thank you very much, everyone. And also, of course, thank you very much, Professor Frans Hoogeveen, for being here and share the knowledge with us, and also Ibu Sulis for being here and sharing her stories. Welcome to Alzheimer's Indonesia Netherlands. This is the session of 41. In this pandemic sessions that the world is opening again already, but we are trying to be consistent to bring the Dutch knowledge to Indonesia as part of our twinning program. And speaking about twinning program, that's where I met Frans. It's back in 2017. It's 5 years ago already. We met in the 20th ADI Asia Pacific Conference, the Dementia Life Cycle Approach in Jakarta from 3rd to 5th November. And back then, we brought 6 Dutch delegates to share the knowledge to Indonesia. It's also part of the twinning program already, and it's not stopping till now and continuing until these sessions. And intimacy, sexuality, and also the friendship, like Tania mentions, is also a challenge in pandemic, and not in the pandemic, it's taboo, it's hard topic to bring, to being brought up. When Frans is telling me that and sharing that he has launched this book, then it's in Dutch. But hopefully that people are now watching and know Dutch, and hopefully it will be in English or maybe in Bahasa Indonesia soon in the future. Hopefully at least in English, Frans. it's really an interesting topic because I think we have some of discussions in the Indonesian caregivers group, and we really want to know that topic in the Netherlands being discussed and being shared, and what we can learn, the transfer knowledge from the Netherlands to Indonesia, and how hopefully these sessions will open mind, open heart, that it's not a taboo to discuss, and we can always share about it because dementia is a person-centered care and approach. So we have to start to discuss about it. I was finding a really good quote last night to close these remarks, and I hope it's really touchy, and I think it's really good for these sessions. Intimacy is not something that just happened between two people. It is a way of being alive. At every moment, we are choosing either to reveal ourselves or to protect ourselves, to value ourselves or to diminish ourselves, to tell the truth or to hide, to dive into life or to avoid it. Intimacy is making the choice to be connected to rather than isolated from our deepest truth at that moment. So intimacy is really the soul of our human being. So thank you, Frans, of being here, and Ibu Sulis and Tania, moderator, and all the Alzheimer's Indonesia, Netherlands volunteers and communities, and everybody's here. Enjoy the sessions and enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Amalia. It's a very touching remarks from you. So now, before we start, as usual, we will start this session with a group picture. So I invite all participants who's not yet opened the camera. Could you please open the camera, and then we will have a group picture before we start the session. Okay, the photographer, are you ready as well? Okay, then. Yeah, I see more people are opening the camera. Okay, so are you ready with the photographer? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
One, give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manik. So we are going to do together the brain gym. So if somebody like often follow our session, this is our routine also to increase our concentration before we start with the session. So let's do the brain gym together. Okay, great. What an exercise that need concentration. It seems easy, but it's not that easy, right? Okay, before we start, I would like to introduce you, Ibu Sulistyah. She's a member of Alzheimer's Indonesia caregiver community and a caregiver for her husband who's diagnosed with young onset dementia at the age of 47. So I will call Ibu Sulis. Hello, Ibu Sulis.
Hello.
Okay, there you go. So thank you for joining ALZI Ned online session today. So before we start with Professor Hoogeveen, would you like to share your experience and how did you handle the confusion? Because I believe that it's not easy for you, but yeah, thank you again for sharing in this session, Ibu Sulis. Please kindly take your time.
Thank you, Mbak Tania. Hello all. My name is Sulis. I want to thank you for this opportunity given to me to share my story with you. I've been taking care of my husband for the past 5 years. My husband was diagnosed with early onset dementia when he was 47 years old. At his productive age, there's still so many things he wants to achieve in his life. For me and my family, that time was very confusing and challenging. I have to take care of our 3 children, aged 5, 7, and 11 at that time, and my husband too. And I have to work to provide them. That was a heaviest time for my family. I felt hopeless and alone and fatigued. At that time, we had struggled without knowledge of this disease. I had to deal with his changed personality. I feel like dealing with different person because of behavior change. My husband used to be a very friendly and warm character. He likes to be involved in any conversation, even since at the beginning of his illness, he still talked a lot. But he often repeat his word without he realize. That's why that what made us feel weird and notice the symptom. Our children often ask their father, "Why do you repeat so often? Keep saying the same word, the same story." Not to mention, he got lost many times during our vacation. He lost in many places, forgot how to get back to the hotel. He was not familiar with the route. His behavior often made our children angry and felt embarrassed. For example, once he got into my son's classroom and asked him to go home, even though wasn't time to go home yet. People in the class are staring at them. Maybe he started to believe that there was something wrong with him. Because of that, he slowly started to withdraw from his social circle, even his closest friend and family. In terms of intimacy, he also changed. Maybe because of the psychiatric medication he was taking. There was time when he was so passionate about our intimacy that it frightened me. And I had to consult the doctor. The doctor said perhaps it was the effect of the mood booster medication. For most people, the effect of the drug is to make the mood improve. While for my husband, the effect make his sexual desire increase inappropriately. After the prescription is changed, he returned to his previous behavior, withdrawn from relationship. At that time, I could not have deep conversation with him, not let alone discuss about our future, our children, to tighten our bonding. He kept avoiding me. I was so depressed. After I consult with neurologists and got a lot of information from ALZI, I gradually began to understand the condition my husband was experiencing. I tried to give understanding to our children and our extended family that behind his illness, my husband is still the same person. Now, after 5 years, my husband cannot speak anything anymore, completely. He can no longer communicate with us. Sometimes he makes sounds ooh or ah, but usually it's sign he's about to cough. His movements are getting slow now. because he has Parkinson too. His face also has no expression, so it's hard to tell if he is happy, sad, or care, or recognize the children. Even so, we know he can still feel love and affection. Sometimes when I or the kids are out of town, our caregiver said he became anxious, cannot sleep at all. But when we come back, he can sleep well. Now I'm with my children and I assist by caregiver. We are taking care of our husband, my husband. We're taking care of my husband. We are still looking for best way to try to provide good treatment to make him comfort. Yeah, we believe every step has its own challenge. I think that's my story for short. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Sulis. Thank you for sharing, and then thank you for being so brave and sharing, and then sharing all the experience you have been through. So hopefully after this session, if you have any questions, also for other participants, if you have any questions, or if you have question, kalau ada pertanyaan dalam bahasa Indonesia, boleh dituliskan di kolom chat box, nanti kami akan menerjemahkan. So if you have any question, you can write down in the chat box in English, both in Indonesia as well. So, okay, now I'm going to introduce our special speaker today, Dr. Frans Hoogeveen, graduated in psychology in 1984 at Leiden University in the Netherlands, where he worked as a researcher in the field of experimental analysis of behavior until 1990. Since then, he specialized in the field of dementia, doing research and working as a clinical psychologist. From 2005 until 2008, he was the chairman of the Dutch Association of Psychogeriatrics, associated with the International Psychogeriatric Association. From 2009 until 2022, he was editor-in-chief of Denkbeeld, a Dutch journal of dementia care. So from 2009 until 2017, he was a professor on psychogeriatric at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. Frans Hoogeveen published several books and more than 100 international and national peer-reviewed articles on dementia. Not to wait any longer, Professor Hoogeveen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tania, for your introduction. You as well, Amalia. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you all on this very important topic. And I would also like to make compliments to Mrs. Sulistyah Krishnamurti for sharing her experience with us, which is very brave, very courageous. I would like to ask you to start the presentation, please. Yes, the first slide, dementia, intimacy and sexuality. And like Tania made clear in her introduction, we are talking about a very important topic here, because when we consider what is most important in our lives, as we speak now with each other, we people without dementia as well, our closest relationships with the people we love and the people who love us, that's one of the most important things in our lives. We share intimacy with those people, and just later on we will discuss with each other what intimacy really is. May I have the next slide, please? Yes. When we talk about intimacy, it's very important that we agree on what it really means. And this would be my proposal. Intimacy refers to a process of interaction in which social partners, as a result of sharing personal and private thoughts and feelings, come to feel understood, appreciated, and cared for by each other. And well, when we think about intimacy, the key words might be closeness, togetherness, affinity, attachment, confidentiality, touching each other, sharing our deepest feelings with each other. And we do that with our spouse, our partner, with our family members, children, grandchildren perhaps, and with our closest friends. May I have the next slide, please? It's also important for our discussion to have a definition of sexuality. And of course, we can differ on our opinions on what it really means, but I propose the following definition. Sexuality is the way people experience and express themselves sexually. This involves not only their behavior, but biological, erotic, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual feelings and behaviors. May I have the next slide, please? Yeah, during our discussion later on, we might discuss if we agree on these two things. Intimacy, do we consider intimacy as a basic human need? And do we consider sexuality as a basic human need? And I would predict that we agree both intimacy and sexuality are human needs. Whether you are 20 years of age, 40, 60, or 80 years of age, if you're healthy or not healthy, where you were born, what your profession is, for all people, intimacy and sexuality may be considered as basic human needs. Next slide, please. There's some delay, yeah. But the way we look upon intimacy and sexuality may be dependent on, for instance, the age of the people we are talking about. So there are certain taboos in my experience in talking about intimacy and sexuality. And we are very used, for instance, when we watch movies about love stories, the main characters in those movies are always young people. So when we look at this photograph, for instance, we may have certain opinions and feelings about what we see. But when we look at the next slide, and then, yeah, this slide is very similar to the previous one, with one difference, that the people depicted here are old people. And our feelings looking at this scene may differ from the previous one. May I have the next slide, please? And in my opinion, intimacy and sexuality are taboo issues, especially when old age and dementia is concerned. And make no mistake, in her introduction, Tania told us that it may be considered as a taboo in Indonesia. It is a taboo in the Netherlands as well. For instance, I can tell you, when I am invited in Alzheimer cafes, I guess you also have Alzheimer cafes, dementia cafes, sessions in which people discuss with each other about issues concerning dementia. When I'm invited in such an Alzheimer cafe and it is announced as intimacy and sexuality in dementia, many people stay away, stay at home, just because of this title. When such a session is introduced in another way, like for instance, I do still love you, or the expression, my husband is not my husband anymore. That more or less covers the story of Sulistyah, I guess, when she told us that his personality, the personality of her husband, was changing because of his dementia. And then it may be difficult to recognize the person he once was. So also in the Netherlands, it may be a very difficult topic to talk about. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you a short film clip in which two elderly people without dementia, people who have been together for about 60 years, share their feelings with us on this topic of intimacy and dementia. And I would like you to watch closely, and after the presentation, we may discuss your opinions and feelings about what you have just seen. Could you start the video clip, please?
Gaan wij nu anders met elkaar om als toen we in het bos samen 23 waren? Uiteraard. Lichamelijk. Verandert natuurlijk wel wat. Je lichaam wordt wat ouder, wordt stijver, wordt... ja...
Nou, laat ik het maar gewoon zo benoemen. Je hebt wat meer aandacht nu op mond en handen en wat minder op de penis of de vagina.
Ja, dingen veranderen.
Dankjewel, Kees, want voor een preuts iemand... Oh nee, jij was de preuts, sorry.
Ik was de preuts van.
Ja, die was voor een verlegen man heb je het toch mooi omschreven. Maar...
Ja, Peter, mee eens?
Ja.
Ja?
Ja.
Ja, het is het mee eens.
Oh, ja. Maar klopt het dus ook dat de verschuiving is als je ouder wordt?
Herhaal nog eens precies wat de verschil is.
Kees zegt van je verschuift je aandacht, zeg maar dus niet van de penis van de vagina naar de hand en de mond. Dat is wat hij zegt.
Ja,
Ja.
je wordt dus creatiever.
Ja.
Want dat dacht ik vroeger nooit zo aan. Ik weet niet. We zijn nu zoveel jaar verder. Je bent nu ook zoveel jaar vertrouwder met elkaar.
Maar wat is dat lichaam nog steeds, verlangt dat nog steeds dezelfde aandacht, liefde, opwinding, zeg maar?
Meer.
Nog steeds meer.
Meer. Allemaal meer.
Het aanraken wordt steeds belangrijker.
Ja?
Ja, maar ik zoek hem steeds vaker op. Die kans krijg ik nu te werken.
Nou, gelukkig ook in de badkamer. Als jij net
We komen
gedoucht
elkaar
hebt.
steeds tegen. Als hij 's morgens onder de douche vandaan komt, heeft hij natuurlijk niet veel aan. We hebben altijd zo, hij gaat eerst douchen en uit die badcel en dan ga ik. Maar dan lig ik nog in bed. Dus ik zie Kees elke morgen binnenkomen met niks aan en zich aankleden. En ik mag er graag naar kijken. Heel erg graag.
En s'avonds, als zij onder de douche is geweest,
komt hij de douche binnen, uiteraard. Dus ik ben daar gewoon trots op. Ik vind dat mooi. Ik vind dat Kees heel mooi... Ik kan het niet laten zien, maar Kees wordt heel mooi oud.
Ik wil het wel laten zien, hoor.
Nee, mag niet. Het is voor haar.
Okay, thank you. I'm very curious as to what your opinion is on this video clip. Anyway, you see two people who apparently really still love each other very much, have a long marriage behind them. And one of the peculiar things the lady says is that her need for being touched, for being loved, increases with age. And that is something that younger people very often do not understand. They have all kind of prejudices as to the importance of intimacy and sexuality in old age. Can we go back to the PowerPoint presentation, please, with the next slide? Yeah. What I also like to show younger people, students, caregivers of people with dementia is this very interesting movie. It's called Wolken 9, Cloud 9. It's a German movie. Cloud 9 refers to the English expression, I'm on cloud 9, which means I'm very happy. This is a love story of two elderly people. May I have the next slide, please? And those elderly people fall in love, which, as I hope you know, is very possible at every age. You can fall in love with somebody else. So these two people fall in love and they engage in all behaviors. Next slide, please. In all behaviors in which people who are in love engage. So they also share sexual activities with each other. And some time ago, I did a presentation on the University of Utrecht for medical students in their 5th year of their studies. People 25 years of age. And I showed them a part of this movie, and I showed them a scene, 5 minutes long, in which those two people have sex with each other. And their acting is very good and with good taste. But the next slide will show the faces, the expression on the faces of those students. And that is a very serious thing, because when I asked those students about what, in their impression on what they saw, many of them engaged in this kind of behavior. They showed disgust or laughed about it. So what those students did was reacting very differently compared to as if I would have shown them the same scene, but now with two beautiful and young actors, as is usually the case in movies. So they have a different reaction based upon only one thing, and that is the age of the actors. In fact, what they do is discriminating. That is what they do. So they react differently on the basis of just one attribute. And that raises the important question: if you think wrongly about, for instance, sexuality in old age, how can you then act correctly, professionally, when issues arise in the people you have to care for professionally? Next slide, please. The person you saw here, Sulistyah, shared a personal experience with you, and I will share with you one of mine. This gentleman you see is my father. And my father died in 2012 after having dementia for 8 years. And in this photograph, you see him with one of my daughters. His dementia was severe at this moment. For instance, he would not recognize me as his son anymore. He also would not recognize his granddaughter, not knowing who she is, what her name is. But when you look closely at this picture, you see that the intimacy is really there. In the last year of his life, he lived in a nursing home because he broke his hip, and my mother couldn't care for him anymore. She had late onset Parkinson's disease. In the nursing home, my father used to wake up in the night in panic, and he would try to get into bed with other residents, not for a sexual reason, but because reasons of the need for safety, for intimacy, for being close to another person. And that was a very difficult issue in that nursing home. And I had to talk with the family members of those other residents in whose bed he would try to put himself, and to talk with those people on how to deal with that. And the end of the story was that there were a couple of other residents who also felt very safe when he got into bed with them. And so I could agree with those family members that it maybe was a good thing. And of course, I asked my mother what she felt about that. And my father would get into bed without doing anything sexually, into bed with a man or a woman. That made no difference to him, because he was looking for intimacy, for closeness, for safety. And I asked my mother, well, how do you feel about that? And to my surprise, she said, well, that he gets into bed with a man, I have no objection to that. But that he gets in bed with another woman, that's very painful to me. But I'm okay with it anyway, because I love him. And that was a very impressive gesture, I guess. Next slide, please. Yeah, what you see here, a lady in her final stage of dementia, also loads on the issue of intimacy, the issue of closeness. In this case, with a baby doll. This lady had 8 children and many grandchildren. And the way she handles her child, because if you look closely at this picture, you don't see a demented old lady with a baby doll, but the meaning of this picture is that you see a mother with her child. And that is also, I guess, a very impressive example of the need for intimacy. Next slide, please. The 4 photographs you see on this slide, the photographs of the same lady with severe dementia, those photographs I took within 10 minutes. And that is remarkable, because at the left upper side, you see this lady very anxious, screaming, crying. And at the right bottom, you see this lady with an expression on her face, which depicts happiness. So once we found out how to do it, we were able to change her mood when she was very anxious within 10 minutes to happiness. And I tell you how we did that, and you will see that on the next slide. Oh, you don't see it on the next slide. I have to tell you about it. This lady was once married. Her husband already died, but she loved her husband very much. And we asked the children which aftershave the husband, her late husband, used, because the smell of that aftershave, which he used for his entire life, may be attached to her feelings for her husband. And he used a aftershave which is still available in the shops. It's called Old Spice. Perhaps you also know it in Indonesia. So we bought a bottle of Old Spice, put something on a handkerchief, and let the lady smell that handkerchief when she was anxious. And then within 10 minutes, 4 out of 5 times, she got happy. So in her implicit memory, her brain really recognized this, and the former feelings were brought up. Next slide, please. Well, this is a thing I often do with professionals and caregivers. I ask them, which aspects of their lives load on their experienced quality of life. So which are the most important things in your life that make you happy? And of course, people differ on that, but in everybody's life, the closest relationships, the relationships with the people you love, are most important. And when those relationships change, when your husband who gets dementia changes in his personality, this is a very difficult thing. So this is what people with dementia and their spouses experience. Next slide, please. Een ogenblik. Je moet eerst je iPhone opgrendelen. Okay. Then what we also can talk about after the presentation is your opinion on if intimacy and sexuality are topics that are easily discussed among elderly people. And also, next slide, please, of the question if intimacy and sexuality are easily discussed by yourself, for instance, as a professional in demential care. And often that is not the case. So these issues are still difficult to discuss also in our professional lives. Next slide, please. And that also raises the question, because those topics are very difficult to discuss, should we wait until a spouse of somebody with dementia has questions on this topic, or should we as professional bring this issue up ourselves, because we know it's a very important issue? And I think professionally we should do that. We should always raise on a well-chosen moment, raise this issue and ask people with dementia and their spouses about their feelings on the changed relationship and how we can support them. That is a very important thing to do. Next slide, please. Okay, then I want to show you a second and final video clip, which makes this issue, I guess, very clear. The clip you are going to see is about these two people. On the left side of this slide, you see them when they were young and in love and when they got married, Lasse and Ulla. It's a Swedish documentary. At the right side of this slide, you see them as they are now, both in their 90s, still living in their own home, but Lasse, the husband, has severe dementia. And Ulla, his wife, is taking care of them. And in the documentary, she says that she finds it very difficult to care for him because the person he was is gone. And she tells us that she could talk with him. So she always was able to talk with him before he had dementia and share her feelings and support each other. And that is all gone. And it's very difficult for her. He changed. But she is searching for a way to see her old husband again. And she asks the advice of a professional. And the professional has asked her to tell her about a situation in her long-lasting marriage in which they used to share intimacy with each other. And Ulla tells the professional that she used to lie down with her head on his lap and then talk with him. And during that situation, he would give her a head massage. And that situation occurred hundreds of times during their marriage and is associated with their feelings for each other. And the professional gives the advice to try to repeat that situation. So to lie down with her head on his lap and to hope that it will evoke the same kind of response, and that a situation will occur in which they still, albeit for a moment, share their feelings for each other with each other. Now we are going to watch that video clip. Now, please.
Jo, det tycker jag kan göra. Jag är alltid trött i huvudet, det vet du väl?
Ja, det har blivit värre.
Tycker du?
Ja.
Vadå värre?
Ja, här borta.
Alltså du tycker att mina geniknölar blir värre? Ja, men man har ju en massa ojämnheter i huvudet, vet du.
Ja, jag tror att det betyder mycket. Ja.
Men det är hemskt skönt när det gör sådär, tycker jag.
Just det. Och sen så kan man ju tro. Nej, inte på det hela dagen. Inte. Du får inte titta så här.
Jag blundar.
Ja. Så kan jag så. Jag kanske måste titta på det.
Ja, kanske jag måste titta och kika på dig. Det är
så det är väl. Men det enklaste är ju att ta en sån här förställning.
Vad då för förställning?
Uppe vid.
Ja, men jag har inte så ont så att det är så farligt, nej.
Nej, men då ska jag bara försöka här, så det är ju det. Ja. Så att jag kan titta upp hela tiden.
Kan du se molnen också på en gång?
Ja, är det
det är en fin utsikt från fönstret vi har här.
Det är verkligen fina. Det är det. Det är det verkligen. Det är faktiskt sant.
Skönt det att ligga så här hos dig.
Tror du mig?
Ja, jag tror dig.
Ja, då kan man ju säga att du är väldigt, väldigt duktig, fin. Det kan ju inte bli annat.
Nej. Du tycker jag är fin?
Ja. Ja, det är ju väldigt. Det ska man se. Ja. Där ser alla.
Ja.
Okay, thank you. Can we return to the presentation, please? I guess what you just saw is the appearance of the old person he was, albeit for just a moment. And for just a moment, he had the attention for her that he used to have. And he even told her she was pretty. And that happened because Ulla, the lady, returned to a situation that occurred many, many times during their marriage. And for both of them was associated with their love for each other. So I guess this is an example of extremely good professional support. This advice was really good. And in the documentary, Ulla says that, okay, now for the coming week, I have courage to take care for him again, because in fact, he told me that he still loves me, that he still finds me pretty. So that may be a professional answer that we could give on the difficulties the spouses of people with dementia experience. Try to support them and think with them about possibilities to keep the relationship that once was good intact. And if that is not possible, to find ways to compensate for the things you lost. That is very important. Because when your husband gets dementia, you lose things. You lose very important things in many respects, among which in intimacy and sexuality. Okay, Tania, I guess this is also looking at the time, perhaps a good moment to stop this presentation and give everybody the opportunity to share their questions and opinions and feelings with each other.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hoogeveen. It's very interesting to see and hear how the need of being loved and embraced is even increased as people age. And moreover, for me, it's like the need that love and intimacy to be showed. It's also impressed me. So it's not about the concept that, yeah, they still need to be loved or need to be touched, but the love that is showed is also important for them. So it is really impressed me. So, okay, I will invite the participants. If you have any questions, you can type it down in the chat box. Before that, I think we already have one question here, Frans, and we start with this one first. Okay, this is from Satria Teguwisesa, so he's a doctor, and then he's from Hovi Club Bali Senior Daycare. So he's from the institution, the senior daycare here in Bali. And then the question is, what should a caregiver do if he sees someone with dementia engaging in intimacy and even showing pornography? Perhaps this is like, the term, when they are not a couple, so perhaps with the other client in the institution, the facility?
Well, I guess this depends on what the effect is on the other client. For instance, when my father, this story I told you about, when my father tried to get into bed with another resident, there were residents who did not want that, because they didn't want a strange man in their beds, although he didn't do anything sexually. So when another resident, another person doesn't want that, I guess it is our job to protect those people. Then we cannot allow, in the case of my father, we could not allow him to get into bed with a person who didn't want that. So I guess that is our job. But when the other person does want it, it's another story. And then, for instance, the question is also raised when two people, for instance, in a nursing home, two people with dementia, develop feelings for each other, feelings of friendship, but those may also be erotic feelings. And both people want that, both people are happy with that, then it raises the question, who are we to oppose to that? That's a very important question. So my answer would be that if a person with dementia engages in behavior that is harmful or stressful to another person, we should make a move. We cannot allow that because we have to protect vulnerable people. But if the other person is happy with that behavior, then we should ask ourselves how to react and ask ourselves what our right is to interfere with the deepest needs of other people. For instance, when my father got into bed with other people, I went to talk with the relatives, what they thought about it. And of course, everybody can understand why I did that. But you can also raise the question, what does the opinion of the relatives matter, in fact? When two elderly people, albeit with dementia, both want to do something with each other, what is the right of other people to interfere? So I hope that is a answer to this really important question.
Okay, thank you, Frans. So, Dr. Teguh, perhaps you have like further question, because it's also now like intrigued me like to have another question about it. But yeah, perhaps Dr. Teguh, do you have any more comments perhaps about the answer from Frans? Okay, so yeah, I think in this situation, because I also like I stay in the long-term facility, Frans, I think like perhaps we as a caregiver in Indonesia, we tend to have like not an obligation, but like how like our responsibility, how to take care of our client, as if like, do we have to inform the spouses at home, for example? So is this perhaps you, do you have any tips perhaps like, okay, if this has happened, then how do we have to react like in terms of facing the spouses, like yeah, their spouses? Do we have to, yeah, we tell them honestly?
Well, first of all, I think we have to think about prevention. So for instance, when a person with dementia is going to live in a nursing home, and we talk with the spouses about this situation and what is going to happen perhaps, then we could perhaps tell the spouse that, prepare the spouse that everywhere where people live closely together, things can arise. For instance, tensions can arise between people. And of course, we can tell the spouse when there would be tensions between his or her husband and other residents, we will inform the spouse about it, and together we will try to find a solution, because it is our primary goal, I guess, in caring for people with dementia is to try to give them quality of life, to support them in the quality of life, and also to support the spouse in quality of life. So when we have told the spouse that tensions can arise, we could also tell that everywhere where people live closely together, also positive relationships can arise. People can make new friendships, feel attracted to each other. And also it can happen that people get erotic feelings for each other, fall in love with each other. And of course, that is very painful. And we should show to the spouse that we fully understand when the spouse finds that a very, very difficult situation. But my point is, we can talk about these issues in advance. We should do that. Well timed, of course, not during the first introduction, but when you have established some confidence mutual confidence with the spouse. So we can talk about these issues in advance and not wait until problems arise. That is very important in my experience. Do not wait until problems arise. And alas, in the Netherlands, the issue of intimacy and sexuality gets on the agenda at a moment in which problems arise. And that is a really serious mistake. We should not do that. Intimacy and sexuality are basic human needs, and we should give attention to those needs. And when those needs are fulfilled, to the extent that those needs are fulfilled, you will see that problem behavior in this issue will decline. So sexual behavior of people with dementia, which is difficult to see and is harmful to other people sometimes, may also be a signal to us that certain needs are not fulfilled. And we should try to think about fulfilling the needs. And to the degree that we succeed in that, we might see lesser levels of problem behavior. I guess that's a very important thing we should think about.
Okay, thank you. That's a very nice suggestion and insight for us, Frans. I will read one of comments in the chat box. So it's from Milton Madi Jokromo. So hi, just want to share that I'm very thankful joining this interesting session of Ibu Sulistyah Krishnamurti and Professor Frans Hoogeveen. It opens my mind and gives me more understanding regarding intimacy issues on dementia people. So in this case, I will probably handle the issues differently than before this session, like the examples that Professor Frans gave. Thank you, Bapak Milton. And also we have another further question here from S. Yuda. So it's very interesting topic to discuss, a well-kept secret or taboo in our life. Following questions I have. First, in your presentation, the prerequisite is close to a perfect one. In an imperfect world, what would you advise if one partner already passed away? Intimacy preference are usually only shared with your partner and are very intimate. Perhaps you can answer this one first and then we go for another question.
Could you repeat or reformulate the question, because I'm not sure if I understand it correctly.
Okay, so in your presentation, this is kind of like the perfect world. So it's like there's one couple, both are still alive. Now the question from Bapak Yuda is, if one partner already passed away, intimacy preferences are usually only shared with your partner. And then if it's his or he or she already passed away, and then how is it going then, I think?
Okay, well, I guess intimacy you don't share only with your partner. Intimacy is closeness to the people you love, so and the people who love you. So that also may involve children, friends, relatives. And that means, for instance, touching each other in a friendly way, in a loving way, sharing emotions with each other. So intimacy is not gone or impossible when the spouse is not alive anymore. As far as the issue on sexuality, it's a different issue because, like you say, people share sexuality in general with their spouse. And when the spouse is gone, albeit be it the person with dementia or the healthy spouse, so to speak, then problems may arise. In the Netherlands, when a person with dementia has sexual desires and the spouse isn't alive or available anymore, because it can also be the case that the spouse is still alive, but feels unable to fulfill sexual activities with the husband because the husband has changed, or the spouse feels that he or she cannot do it anymore because it doesn't feel right, or it may feel like taking advantage of the people with dementia. That's also something I heard quite regularly. And in the Netherlands, we have professional organizations of people who provide sexual services to people with disabilities, not only to people with dementia, but also people with other neurological disease like multiple sclerosis or ALS, or people with mental disabilities. And those people may be involved in fulfilling the needs of people with disabilities. And of course, this is also a very sensitive issue, and people have all kinds of opinions on that. But in my book, I interviewed some people who offered these services, And they told me that the outside world thinks that the services they deliver are mainly sexual activities. And they told me that is not the case. So 80 or 90% of their services is providing intimacy, lying in bed with the person with disabilities, touching them in a good way, sharing feelings, giving closeness. And in some of the cases, also sexual behavior is involved. So this may be seen as professional support as well. Although, of course, taboos on this kind of services may be very present and very alive.
Okay, I think your explanation, yeah, this is also about the service. It's perhaps like most of the participants have comments on this, because this is also related with the second question, because it's about cultural-based approach. So whether the service is also cultural appropriate or not in different countries. So I think it's going to be different in different countries. So the second question is, have you any idea about information about cultural-based approach on this topic? I presume religion belief would play a major role in dealing with this topic.
Yes. Well, that is a very interesting issue, a cultural approach, because, of course, you can say something about differences between cultures, for instance, based on belief. But, for instance, in the Indonesian culture, as in the Dutch culture, individual people differ from each other. So it's very difficult to make generalized comments on that. And I think the most important thing is to discuss these very important issues in a serious way with each other. And then you can decide on whether you think, for instance, these kind of professional services are acceptable or not. So I myself, I'm very careful in and hesitant also in saying something about differences between cultures, because then there's the danger of overgeneralizing, you see, because there's enormous variation, individual variation between people in every way. So in fact, it's also it remains an individual case. So when these kinds of issues arise, you should discuss that intensely with each other, with the person involved, and I guess that's the most important thing. And yeah, when certain cultural beliefs or spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs make it very difficult or impossible to act in certain ways, yeah, I guess we should respect that, and anyway, keep talking about it. That's the most important thing, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Frans. And then the next one, I will invite Ibu Wasi here to ask some question, because Ibu Wasi, Ibu Wasi, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, Professor Frans. Thank you for all the explanation. Very interesting. In fact, some of my questions were related to what you've explained, so I won't ask that anymore. But I do have, I'm relating to that slide that you showed about the expressions of the young people. And they had discussed, like, expressions disgusted in quotes when they see a sexual, well, you know what I mean. what is the psychology behind that for the young ones? Why do they react like that? And how can we teach them that, as you said before, you explained that intimacy, sexuality, everybody needs it, regardless the age, whether we're young, old, dementia or not dementia, so that they can understand. And why I'm asking this is because I do have friends who have children, and they do talk, and sometimes they joke about that. And because I know a little bit now with what's going on with dementia, Alzheimer dementia, maybe if I can explain more how they should understand about, you know, intimacy, maybe they will understand more. I mean, it's just a small circle of young people, but what's the psychology? Why do young people think like that, react like that when it comes to elderly having sex? I'll just say it bluntly. Why is that? Because maybe it's a question that is stupid, I don't know, but I just want to know the psychology behind them, because with us, the elderly, well, we go through it and we know what it is, we feel it, whilst they don't. So yeah, I think that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and it certainly is not a stupid question. It's a very important question, but also a very difficult one. We could talk about that for the whole day. What is the psychology behind it? And there are many aspects, I guess. One of them is that we are indoctrinated, so to speak, as this issue is concerned, with certain images, like, for instance, in movies, that when love and sexuality is expressed, it's also between beautiful young people. Do you agree? Beautiful young people, never an obese person, never a person with one leg, never an old person. So young people are familiar with those images and unfamiliar with people engaging in those behaviors who do not resemble themselves. That's also, I guess, an important issue, that people who are different from ourselves are also considered to be different in very many other ways. So, and what is the solution, I guess, the direction in which we should move on inviting people to make other considerations, think differently? I guess that's not arguing. That's not telling them about it. That I don't believe in the effect of that. I believe strongly in the effect of making them experience what it is. And may I give you one or two examples? One example is, I was in a nursing home, and the people there told me that, yes, they had attention for the issue of intimacy and sexuality of their residents. And I asked them to explain to me and show to me how they did it. And they told me, well, some of our residents have the need, as have their spouses, to be sexually active with each other. And we make that possible, they told me. And I asked them how. Well, we have arranged for a special room, a bedroom, kind of a hotel room, in which spouses of people with dementia can spend the night and be sexually active with their spouses if they desire to do that. And then the hotel room is available, and there's a do not disturb sign on the door, so they really are not disturbed, and so they are able to be intimate with each other. And then I asked the spouses what they thought about that opportunity. And the spouses, they told me, well, it's very sympathetic that those professionals have thought about that and offer me this opportunity. But yeah, how do I feel when I'm in that room with my wife or my husband, and there's a do not disturb sign on the door, and everybody knows what I'm doing there. And how should I feel about that? And then my proposal to the director, to the manager of the facility, was as follows. I asked the manager, do you have a spouse? Yes, she had. And then I said, well, I propose the following. Please spend Monday night with your spouse in that bedroom in your facility and make love to him. And there will be a sign on the door, do not disturb, and you won't be disturbed. And Tuesday, I will make a telephone call to you and ask you what your experience was. And of course, she didn't follow that proposal, but she immediately understood what I meant, is that you should try to experience what the people you work for experience. And another example is, during the first wave of the pandemic in the Netherlands, very strong measures were taken to prevent residents in nursing homes to be infected. So they couldn't receive visits from their relatives, or visits should take place behind the glass wall, for instance. So people were not touched lovingly, residents were not touched lovingly by their relatives for a long time. And that had devastating effects on many of them. Now we agree that those measures were too harsh. But when you would like to experience what it is not to be touched lovingly for a long period of time, you should do, I guess, that's very often my proposal, you should try to experience that yourselves. So for instance, the people now, we are talking with each other. Tonight, tell your spouse, tell your children, tell your friends not to touch you for 4 days, let's say, not to touch you lovingly, and not to share their feelings with you. And you, of course, you explain why you asked them that, because you want to do this experiment. And well, I will predict that if you do that for a couple of days, you will experience the enormous effects of having to miss intimacy, albeit for such a short period of time. So I guess the answer to your question, how to convince people, how to make them aware of the needs of people who are not like themselves, is not arguing with them. So it's not in a cognitive way you should do it, that's my experience, but you should try to make them feel it, to make them experience it. And that gets people into motion, emotion. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I'll try that. That's a good way to suggest, so that they live it, as you say, they experience it, and then maybe they'll understand more. Thank you very much.
It can be considered as learning by experience,
Yeah,
learning by emotion, not learning by cognitive things.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kak Tania.
Thank you. Okay, here I see S. Yuda. Papa S. Yuda raised his hand. Perhaps you can speak directly then, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Hoogeveen. A very interesting topic. Am I clear enough, audible?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you are.
Just one short question. Is it fair enough to say, if I would say that we compare intimacy like water, which everyone needs to stay alive, and sexuality is more like what another kind of type of waters, for example, coffee, Coke, and I don't know, whatever. You not necessarily need to drink coffee or tea or something else, but surely you need water to stay alive. Is it fair enough, or is it a very daring comparison?
It's very interesting, I guess, and you certainly have a point that.
But you get my point, right?
Yeah, I
That
get
is-
your point, because
Yeah.
it's very difficult to live without intimacy.
Yeah.
It's against human nature to live without intimacy, but it certainly is possible to live without sexuality. That's, I guess, what you mean.
Yes, correct.
But I guess you are right there. But still, sexuality, sexual behavior contributes to people's happiness. But I guess you are right there, that we should be aware of differences, that I'm sure that people who do not experience any intimacy will be very, very unhappy. And a happy life, I guess, without sexuality is possible. But we should also always consider that individual people differ from each other, also in this respect. So there are people for who sexual behavior is more important than for other people. And also in the expression of those behaviors, there are many differences. So again, it is difficult to make general statements. But as a whole, I agree with what you say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Yuda. Now I will, because of the time limitation, I will read like two last questions. So the other one is through my WhatsApp, and then the other one is through the chat box. It's similar. So elderly people, from Ibu Ida Ridwan. So elderly people need to be touched. What should I do if patients with dementia deliberately do that to the caregiver? Encourage them or discourage them? So caregiver is the paid person one, so it's not a family caregiver. So this is similar with the question from that goes through my WhatsApp. So how, this is from the caregiver in the long-term institution. The question is, do we need to keep distance to the intimate gesture from people with dementia who had many girlfriends before? So this is in this case, so the client, so in the people with dementia, he had many girlfriends before. He liked young caregivers, and then he started to kiss the hand of the caregivers. Then what should they do? So this is between like the caregivers and the people with dementia then.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think that a professional whose job it is to take care of people with dementia, in this case, it is his or her job to try to make people happy. So it's not only a question of giving traditional care, like washing people, giving them food, looking care after their health. It is also having a relationship with people, so being friendly. But of course, there are limits there. And every professional has his or her own limits. For instance, the question, if you help at night the person with dementia into bed because they are going to sleep, and the person with dementia asks the nurse, can I get a kiss on the cheek? Then the nurse has to decide if she is willing to do that or not. So there may be variations in the attitudes of professionals. But when the person with dementia passes a certain limit, like asking for sexual things or engaging or touching the professional in an inappropriate way, then we should not blame the person with dementia, because we can think to ourselves, well, that is the disease, albeit possible, like in your example, that that person also, before he had dementia, was somebody who engaged in that kind of behavior. But we don't have to tolerate it. So we should express our limits in that. And in doing that, not many things are forbidden, I guess. And so we shouldn't blame the person with dementia when he does something inappropriate, but we do not have to tolerate it. And we can react in the same way as that we do to people without dementia. That's the point. And of course, sometimes professionals find it very difficult because they sympathize towards the person with dementia. So they are not inclined to be very clear. So for instance, to say to the person with dementia, I don't want you to do that. And of course, you do not have to react in that way. You can also use humor and wit, like to say to somebody, well, I think you're a very attractive gentleman, but I'm sure that my husband would not allow this. So you can solve some issues with a joke, but you can also be very strict. So anyway, you should discuss that with each other. And also my point would be in the education of professional caregivers, discuss these issues with each other in time. Do not wait until problems arise. Be prepared.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hoogeveen. So Ibu Ida Ridwan, I hope the answer is pretty clear. Okay, so unfortunately, we have to end this discussion session. Thank you so much, Professor Hoogeveen. This is such a really nice, it brought lots of insights and also nice discussion. So I hope through this session, we have a better understanding of how dementia can change the expression of people with dementia towards love and intimacy. And then also the importance to discuss this issue for everybody, and then start to discuss it before some problems happen. I will really put a note of that. Okay, so before we close the session, I would like to ask Manik to show our next ALZI Ned session, and then perhaps we hope that you can join. So our next session will be Happy Healthy Kartini. So this is our annual session, but this year it will be our comeback, resume of offline session after 2 years. It will be held on 14th of May, 2022. And also again, we are open for volunteering. So if you need more information related to ALZI Ned activities, you can follow our social media or contact us directly. I also write down in the chat box, if you have further questions in the future, you can contact Professor Frans Hoogeveen in the website. So you can contact him through that website, and then you will find the link for him to contact him then. Okay, so it's again, thank you so much, Professor Frans Hoogeveen, for joining us in this 41st ALZI Ned session. Thank you so much, Ibu Sulis, for sharing your experience. I hope if you have any questions then, and then you hesitate to discuss it here, you can contact directly Professor Frans, okay? And then also to other participants, thank you so much. We believe that this session will bring lots of new information, and then again, we have the same aim to increase the quality of life for people with dementia and also the family and the caregiver as well. Okay, hope to see you again in our next session. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Frans, Bu Sulis.
Welcome.
Siapa bilang pikun itu biasa saja? Siapa bilang pikun itu tak berbahaya? Jangan malu dengan pikun, jangan malu dengan pikun. Hati-hatilah, bila sudah mulai lupa, bingung tidak fokus, marah-marah curiga yang berlebihan. Pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu dengan pikun. Siapa bilang pikun itu biasa saja? Siapa bilang pikun itu tak berbahaya? Jangan malu dengan pikun, jangan malu dengan pikun. Hati-hatilah, bila sudah mulai lupa, bingung tidak fokus, marah-marah curiga yang berlebihan. Pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu dengan pikun. Makanya jangan galau, makanya jangan sedih, makanya mulai dari sekarang sadari dan kenali tanda-tandanya. Waspadalah, waspadalah, waspada, 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 waspadalah. Pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu dengan pikun. Siapa bilang pikun itu biasa saja? Siapa bilang pikun itu tak berbahaya? Jangan malu dengan pikun, jangan malu dengan pikun. Hati-hatilah, bila sudah mulai lupa, bingung tidak fokus, marah-marah curiga yang berlebihan. Pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan, jangan pikun, pikun jangan, jangan malu dengan pikun.
Bye everyone. Frans, that's a song from Jangan Maklum dengan Pikun is Do Not Underestimate Memory Loss.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a mix of everything.
Did I understand correctly that Mrs. Sulistyah wants to share some issues?
Yeah, actually, there's